Hello, I'm Jan Slattery. I'm a member of the National Review Board of the Bishops' Conference in Washington, D.C. I'm also the former director of the Office for the Protection of Children and Youth here in the Archdiocese of Chicago. There have been many questions directed at the Archdiocese regarding the handling of the sex abuse crisis in the Church. I've been asked to pose those questions directly to Cardinal Blase Cupich and Vicar General Bishop Ron Hicks. And with that, we're going to begin. Welcome.
Great. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Welcome back home. Good to have you
Well,
here.
thank you. Good to be here. The first question really is for us to look at the victim situation. I know we in the Archdiocese have for years supported victims and their families, but I think it's an important piece for you, Archbishop, to talk about your own experience and what really has led you forward in your commitment to protecting children.
Well, for nearly 30 years, the Archdiocese, since the time Cardinal Bernardine in 1992 put together principles for child protection, named outreach to victims and protection of children as the first priority. So we've been at this for 3 decades. And that is something that has to be the core of everything else that we do. I've always said if you put the child in the middle of the room and the adults gather around, we'll get it right. And that, I think, is something we need to keep in mind as we move forward.
I agree with you totally. What about you, Bishop Hicks? What experiences have you brought to the protection of children?
Just to put it in perspective, right after I graduated from college, I did 1 year of working as a volunteer in Mexico at a home for orphaned and abandoned children, over 1,000 children living there. And I have a great love for children, and to think that anyone would abuse a child is absolutely horrific to me and to all of us. And to know that the Archdiocese of Chicago is committed to the protection of children is something that I support completely with all my heart.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in El Salvador?
Certainly. It's once I was ordained, I got a special permission to work for 5 years in El Salvador in the same organization, caring for orphaned and abandoned children. And it recommitted my not only love for children, but our need to protect all children, and not only orphaned and abandoned children, but our children in Chicago, throughout the entire world.
Thank you. I think the next question I want to talk about is, what the Archdiocese has done historically to get to this point. We've come a long way, and I think we have a long way to go, perhaps. We're looking into all of that right now. But can you talk about that, the history of what we have done?
Well, as I said earlier, Chicago has been a pace setter in bringing about not only child protection as a priority, but a system that allows children to be safe. And so we've built on that. In 1992, as I said, Cardinal Bernardine brought to Washington what we're doing and gave it to the rest of the bishops. And I've often thought, had every bishop taken those documents home and implemented that, we'd be in a much different place today. But then in 2002, I was a young bishop in Dallas when we adopted the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, based to a large part on what Cardinal Bernardine had presented 10 years earlier. And again, it was an opportunity for us to embrace this issue. I've always believed that the Charter works, but you have to implement it, and you've got to be faithful to it. The real crisis at this moment is that some bishops did not do their job.
Cardinal, what have you learned over the years that you would like to bring going forward to the abuse scandal?
I've learned that if I'm going to learn anything, it has to come from my ongoing encounters with victim survivors. They have a lot to teach us. They have an experience that we need to tap into in a way that allows us to see the wound that's there that has to be healed. But also, we've learned as well from them that we cannot take for granted the need to build on what we've done. This is something that is ongoing for us. We can't take our eye off the ball. And especially as bishops now take up this issue in this particular moment, we have to learn about new ways to hold each other accountable. That, I think, is a message of this summer. How do we establish a means by which we hold each other accountable? That is a pathway going forward, and we have to be motivated by our experience and interaction with those who are victims.
Bishop Hicks, you're newly ordained. You've just come from attending your first bishop's meeting. What was that experience?
I realized that I'm new, and it was a new culture, a new system, and I have a lot to learn. But one of the things that I was impressed with is that as bishops, we spent an entire day in prayer. It was some in silence, some together, some reflection. But during that prayer, they had a number of speakers, victim survivors, who spoke directly to us from their experiences, their heartbreak, their healing, many perspectives. And as I listened to them, they not only touched my heart deeply, but it also reaffirmed as a bishop that we have to work together to make sure that our commitment to protect children and to assist victim survivors is an absolute priority in our church.
I've had the privilege of meeting both of the victim survivors who spoke to you.
Yeah.
And I think truly you have an understanding of the length of time healing takes, the depth of the pain, and also the effects on families. They are both very, very strong people, I think, to have done that.
It was a blessing to have them there with us. Yeah.
And it was a real sign of the courage that it took for them to come forward to share that deep pain with others. And I was humbled by their implicit trust in us as they spoke. We should never take that trust for granted.
I think one of the main concerns right now among the laity, and also came up at the National Review Board meeting, is bishop accountability. That's a real concern among the laity. And I think going forward, that's probably one of the main issues that needs to be addressed.
It is. And along with accountability has to be transparency, which means the involvement of lay people. There's an equation, I think, that's worth noting. That is, whenever a bishop worked with the lay review board in his diocese, they got it right for the most part. But when they didn't, they got it wrong for the most part. And I think it is a matter now of making sure that we have visibility by lay people in what we're doing with transparency, their involvement, their advice, but also making sure that everyone is held accountable. No one is going to be given exemption from this, no matter their status or their position or whatever. It's too important for us. And so my hope would be that as we move forward, we would keep accountability, visibility, transparency, but lay involvement as core values as we move forward.
What are we doing right now in the Archdiocese that has not already been done? In other words, in the abuse situations where we do have some instances yet of clerical sexual abuse, have we approached it any differently? Have we learned anything from the past?
Yes, I think that we have learned a lot from the past. For instance, we continually learn from victims about the harm done. The more that we engage them, the more we can tell their story and convince people that this is a serious priority for the life of the church. We also have to realize that even though we have these programs of background checks and safe environment and teaching children how to recognize grooming and bad behavior, we also have a problem sometimes of keeping the momentum going. People in the pew, parents and so on, sometimes resist programs by which they're going to have safe environment training, where they think it's kind of a done deal, or maybe pastors think it's a done deal. Well, this past year showed that it is not a done deal and never will be. The protection of children has to be a top priority year after year for us, and we can't take our eye off the ball.
And as he said, we have to keep the momentum going. Just to put it into perspective, I was ordained in 1994 as a priest, and but even before that, in 1992 as a seminarian, it was made clear to me, to my classmates, to everyone who is going through formation, that the protection of children is going to be priority number one, that we are going to assist victims. That this isn't something new that I learned about midway into my priesthood. This has been a part of who and what I am and my classmates and the Presbyterate of Chicago and the lay people and all of us who have been involved. But as the Cardinal says, we can't lose momentum. I think it'd be easy sometimes to rest on our laurels and say, we have a good system. We're doing what's necessary. Look at what we've done. And we can't do that. We always have to make sure that the commitment is our children and that they are being protected. One other thing, just saying that we have to be committed to that. I was recently with a group of victim survivors, and one particular woman struck me in what she said. She said that after years of processing, of healing, of trying to come to grips with everything that she went to, she said right now, if she, for her own family or for someone else's family, had to recommend, where do I send my child where they're going to be the safest? She said, I'd send him to the Roman Catholic Church. She says, the system that you've developed is excellent. But she also told us you don't stop there. You continue to work at it, and we have to. As an organization, as an institution, as a people who follow Christ, we're committed to making sure our children are safe.
That's good.
But the other piece here, and the Pope has said this time and again, is that we also have to work at this culture of clericalism and privilege that allowed this to happen. Sure. And as long as that is still there in pockets around the world, around the church in this country, we're always going to be vulnerable. Because what you do is you build a system by which people feel protected, powerful, and privileged, that they're exempt from any accountability and transparency because they're a special group. That has to change. And that is, I think, by dealing with that culture of clericalism, not only is it going to help us in keeping children safe, but it's going to make us a better church. It's going to make sure that we use the gifts, the talents, the charisms of all of our lay people, trusting that we're all in this together. We're going to be healthier if we pursue this direction that the Holy Father is giving us.
You've been asked by Pope Francis now to be a key leader in preparation of Bishops' meeting in Rome. How do you see that going forward? What do you hope comes from that meeting?
Well, the Holy Father has asked of us to be the planning committee, but also to consult with the Papal Commission for Child Protection, with victim survivors, with Episcopal conferences from around the world, in order to, first of all, plan it in such a way that we create a sense of ownership in the worldwide church for this. This is not a hot-button issue in a lot of countries around the world. It doesn't mean that abuse is not happening, but it is not something that has risen to the point where it is a priority. And the Holy Father is saying that era is over. This is a top priority for all of us, and we have to all together own this going forward if we're going to make headway. And the other is that we also have to come away from that meeting with some very clear lines of responsibility and action steps by which we're going to make sure that children are safe, and that also there is going to be accountability. He's already gone ahead and removed bishops, not only for their own personal abuse and misbehavior, but also for mishandling cases. And the entire episcopate, the entire bishops' conference of Chile offered their resignation. And he has accepted a number of them already.
Yes.
So the Pope is laser fixed on this. In my discussions with him, he's very clear that this is a priority, but he wants to drive home to bishops, for the president of bishops' conferences, to take home to their own countries the devastating effects that abuse of children has on people and on the church. He wants to put that front and center. And it's out of that, as I said earlier, when you put the child in the middle of the room and you hear the voice of one who's been wounded so deeply by abuse from a cleric, you have no alternative but to move forward. That's what he wants to do.
Thank you. I think that's helpful for many people to understand. I was in Rome in 2012. Now, that's a long time ago now. But I did witness what you're talking about. There were a number of bishops from a variety of countries who did not recognize the need to do anything when it came to protecting children. So I really wish you well in that effort. I think you're going to need it as we go forward.
Well, keep praying for success. Pray for the Pope. I'm just saying he's going to be 82 in December, and yet he has a youthfulness and the fight to get this done. And nobody should underestimate him.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to add?
Just one more point. It's we obviously have a commitment to the protection of children, but we also have a responsibility. If we're a family of God, if we are a church, we have a responsibility to our victim survivors. And the fact that we have ministry assistants here in the Archdiocese of Chicago is extremely important and valuable. One of the things that I've heard just listening to victim survivors is how long healing takes.
Yes.
It is not something that we can just say, sorry this happened, or I'll say a prayer for you, and then there's a lot of accompaniment, and it's a lot of walking with, and that's what church does, that's what family does, and we want people to come to hope and to healing and to all things good, and but we have a special commitment to them also.
It's been really an eye-opener, I think, for many people who will be able to hear your thoughts and also to understand the commitment you both have to the protection of children and also for recognizing the anger, the hurt that our church has experienced.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To learn more about what the Archdiocese has done and continues to do to address this issue, please visit heal.archchicago.org. I'm Jan Slattery. Thank you for watching.